Pei-du died on our way to elope. That night, I knelt before his body, unable to stop my tears. His always proud elder brother looked at me as if he were staring at a dead person. He struck me across the face from above. The Su family's daughter is truly shameless. He sought to marry me, then humiliated me in every possible way, all to avenge his brother's death. But later, it was also him who shielded me behind him, raised his spear, and swore, "My wife is pure and virtuous. Who dares to insult her?" It was he who threw me into the dirt, yet also he who treated me like a precious jewel. From now on, you will be my wife, Pei-Yoji's wife. Just behave yourself. Don't do anything you shouldn't. On our wedding night, my husband didn't even lift my bridal veil. He simply left those two cold words behind and walked away. I nodded in agreement. All I could see were his black boots. After a while, the boots disappeared from my sight. Then I heard the door close. I knew Pei-Yoji had left. Even though I was his lawfully wedded wife, he would never touch me, because he hated me. Not long ago, his only brother died. Because of me. My maid, Ryu, watched from the side, not daring to breathe. Only when the sound of footsteps faded did she timidly tug at my sleeve. "Madam, he's gone. General Pei is really frightening. When he looks at me, I can't help but tremble." Second young master was so gentle, it's hard to believe he had a brother like this. After saying that, she realized she'd misspoken and quickly fell silent. Pei Erlang, Pei-du, was gentle by nature, studious, and intelligent. A true gentleman. However, everyone knew that such a person died while trying to elope with me. I lifted my veil, staring at the red candles before me, and said softly, "General Pei has fought many battles, his reputation is well known. It's only natural for him to be so imposing. I am a concubine-born daughter. My father is just a minor official, with no favor from the emperor. No one could have predicted I would marry Pei-Yoji. He comes from a family of generals. Although his parents died early, he alone carried the family name. There were already rumors in the capital that once he pacified the northern frontier, the emperor would grant him the title of Marquis, keeping him in the capital. A general this young, being granted such an honor, hadn't been seen in hundreds of years. He was full of pride, a close confidant of the emperor. Who wouldn't be envious? Because of this, the servants in the household often felt sorry for Pei-Yoji. Every time Ryu went out, she would return with red-rimmed eyes. I asked her, "Did they curse me again?" Ryu awkwardly turned her head away, tears falling even harder. I sighed. "They probably called me shameless, a bringer of bad luck. I already guessed it. It's fine, I don't care." After all, that day in the morning hall, what Pei-Yoji said to me was far worse than that. I still remember it clearly. It was the third day after Pei-du died. I was forced to kneel in the morning hall by the Pei family. Before that, my father had kept insisting on sending me to be a concubine for the emperor's most favored eunuch. But at that moment, he didn't dare say a word. He left me at the Pei household, because as soon as the news reached the northern frontier, General Pei-Yoji of the Left Guard gave an order. "The one responsible is the Su family's daughter. Detain her." He then rushed back to the capital. When he saw me, he came straight over and slapped me. My face was already wet with tears. His hand was rough and sweaty. Just one slap, and I was left with ringing ears. "The Su family's daughter is truly shameless," he said coldly. I forced myself to hold on and raise my head. I caused Pei-du's death. If I could die here in front of his spirit to repay him, I would have no complaints. "General, kill me." Pei-Yoji was stunned, hesitated for a moment, then reached for the knife at his waist, seemingly ready to kill me on the spot. However, just then the steward hurried in from outside, holding a letter. "General, this is a letter from Second Young Master, written to you. It arrived at the northern frontier just after you left, so they followed you to deliver it." This was the last message Pei-du left for his elder brother. Pei-Yoji glanced coldly at me, sheathed his knife, and took the letter. It was just a single page. But he read it very carefully and slowly. By the end, his expression had become hesitant and sorrowful. After a long while, I don't know what decision he made, but he finally said to me, "You will stay here and watch over his spirit until he is laid to rest. I will marry you." His words shocked everyone in the hall. The paper in his hand was the finest from Qingxin Hall in the capital, as thin as cicada wings, but in his hands, it seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. It weighed him down, leaving him breathless. And it spared me from death under his blade. That night, after calming down, he called in some people and asked a lot of questions. Finally, he came to me. The man stood tall and cold, but he couldn't hide his exhaustion. From above, he said, "Stand up." I nodded, numb, and obediently stood. At that moment, I suddenly looked up. I saw his face clearly. He had a very handsome face, more chiseled than Pei Du's, with sharper features. He exuded a colder aura, but his expression was filled with sorrow. So I slowly said, "His health was never good." Hearing this, Pei Yoji didn't respond, just stared at me quietly. The emperor's favorite eunuch wanted to take me as his concubine. Pei Du couldn't bear it, so he took me and fled. He was very clever, no, extremely clever. He led me north, evading the bounty and the pursuers. But just as we neared the northern frontier, he started to run a high fever. That's when I learned that for over a year, he had been coughing up blood frequently, and his days were numbered. It was then, while I was searching for a doctor, that the people from Luo Jusi found me. As I spoke, my voice began to choke with emotion. After I returned, I secretly went to consult the household doctor. Pei Du could have lived for 2 more years. If not for me, he wouldn't have had to run, he wouldn't have been so exhausted, and he could have had the best medicine to nourish his health. Pei Yoji clearly already knew this. His expression didn't change. He had only asked me because I was the last person Pei Du saw before he died. He wanted to hear me say it again. I said finally, "He wanted to bring me to find you." He was silent for a moment, pressing his lips together. After a while, he said, "Stay at the Pei household. There's no need to return." Tears welled up in my eyes. "All right. How did you two meet?" 3 years ago, he was discussing poetry with someone. After drinking at night, he wanted to look at the moon and climbed over my wall. He nearly fell, and I caught him. His expression softened slightly, and he asked, "Your name is Su Panji?" "Yes." Not long after that, the imperial decree for our marriage arrived. 5. After our marriage, I began managing the household. I felt guilty and didn't want Pei Yuji to be troubled by trivial matters, so I strove to do everything as well as possible. I had never learned how to do this before, so it was inevitably difficult. Everyone said that marrying Pei Yoji was a great bargain for me. I knew nothing of household affairs, and my status was low. How could someone like me possibly be worthy of Pei Dalong, who was born into a prestigious family? So, at the banquet hosted by the Grand Princess, I suffered a great deal of ridicule. People pointed at me, saying, "Look, that's the concubine-born daughter of the Su family, using her good looks to turn the Pei brothers around her little finger. She doesn't know her place. You don't know, do you?" A month ago, someone from the palace wanted to take her as a concubine. She was almost carried to the bed, but Pei Air saved her in time. Someone laughed foolishly. "Huh? A eunuch? She really doesn't have any standards." Finally, someone brought up another person. "Enough. Her good days are numbered. Princess Wuyang is coming back soon. When she returns, there's bound to be trouble. Just wait and see." I had heard of this Princess Wuyang before. When Pei Du was still alive, he used to tell me about the affairs at court. Back when the emperor was young, he was decisive in his killings, but now he shows excessive favoritism toward eunuchs. If not for the Grand Princess's advice, the court would have already descended into chaos. He was weak and ill, so his words didn't carry much strength, but they terrified me so much I almost covered his mouth. He smiled faintly, and as if remembering something, casually said, "By the way, the Grand Princess has a daughter, titled Wuyang, who has always been determined since childhood to become my sister-in-law." His sister-in-law, Pei Yoji's wife. Back then, I was just an outsider and dismissed it. Now, things were different, but those people were right. When I married Pei Yoji, Princess Wuyong wasn't in the capital. When she returns, who knows what will happen?
6.
After leaving the Grand Princess's residence, I didn't dare linger outside. I headed straight for the Pei residence. However, halfway there, I unexpectedly ran into Pei Yoji. He was surrounded by several noble youths, catching up in front of a tea house. His expression remained indifferent, only occasionally speaking a word or two. When he saw me, he was momentarily stunned. The people around him then started scrutinizing me closely, and finally one of them realized, "Isn't that your wife?" Pei Yoji frowned slightly, his expression showing a bit of impatience as his tone lowered. "Don't call her that." The man muttered quietly in response. "It seems the rumors aren't false. You really do despise her. If that's the case, why did you marry her in the first place?" I stayed silent, unable to offer a reply. Pei Yoji glanced at me and only said 3 words. "Why aren't you leaving?" He was ordering me to leave. I nodded, quickened my pace, and left without looking back. Even though I walked away as fast as I could, I still overheard their conversation behind me. "Do you really dislike your new wife?" "Hey, Pei Yoji, be honest, are you still thinking about Wuyang?" I didn't know which question he was answering. 7.
Tatt natt, I Dreamdev Pei du again.
He was still dressed in a white robe, draped in a cloak, looking elegant as ever. He picked me up from Luo Juicy's bed, carefully adjusting my clothes, gently removing the blood-stained hairpin from my hand, and soothing me. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." I had injured Luo Juicy's arm with the hairpin, and his expression was furious as he glared at Peidu. "A sickly boy like you thinks you can play the hero? Does your elder brother, out on the frontier, know how sentimental you are?" Peidu was always gentle, but at that moment, he showed an unusual sharpness. "Panji is a good girl. How could she become a concubine for someone like you? Do you have any shame?" With that, before Luo Juicy could react, Peidu, under the protection of the Pei family's guards, took me out of the estate and placed me in a carriage, taking me away from the city. Then, filled with guilt, he told me, "I don't have enough power to protect you. When he realizes what happened tomorrow, he'll still come after you. So, Panji, I'm taking you to find my brother." In the blink of an eye, I found him lying weakly in my arms, his breath fading. "I'm sorry. I thought I could hold on." At that point in the dream, I suddenly woke up. My pillow was soaked with tears.
8.
Outside, the wind was blowing. Unable to fall back asleep, I was about to get up to close the window. But suddenly, I heard the door open. I didn't dare breathe, and just as I was about to speak, I caught the scent of alcohol. At the same time, my wrist was grabbed tightly. A voice asked, "Did someone bully you at the banquet today?" I had imagined countless things he might say to me, such as, "Why aren't you dead yet? Peidu died because of you. Don't you feel any guilt?" But I never expected this. I stayed silent for a moment, then answered truthfully, "Yes." He let out a low grunt, seemingly displeased. "Do you know what your status is now?" I lowered my head and instinctively licked my dry lips. "I am the wife of Pei Yoji, General of the Left Guard." He sneered. "At least you're not stupid. Next time, if someone dares speak ill of you, don't hold back."
Got it.
A strange emotion surged within me. He continued, as if to himself, "Your cowardice makes me look bad." I was silent for a moment before lifting my head and meeting his gaze. But I caused Peidu's death. Would he really let me act boldly and rely on his power? He interrupted me impatiently. "I've told you what to do. Just remember it." For a moment, I was at a loss for words. "All right." Only then did he seem to breathe a sigh of relief, and he became more sober. Then he realized that the distance between us was uncomfortably close. He frowned and suddenly pushed me away. Caught off guard, I stumbled back and my back hit something hard, sending a wave of numbness through me. He glanced at me, pressed his lips together, as if wanting to say something, but in the end, he turned and left without a word. The pain made it difficult for me to stand, so after a long while, I found some ointment and applied it myself. Then I lay awake until dawn. 9. Pei was a military man who would practice archery and martial arts every morning at the training ground. He usually trained at the East Courtyard, far from where I stayed, which suited him, as he didn't want to see me. But that morning, for some unknown reason, he came to the training ground near the West Courtyard, which was very close to my residence. Close enough that I could hear the commotion from there. Rui sneaked a glance in that direction before turning to tell me, "The general is truly impressive. No wonder so many girls wanted to marry him before." The steward said the targets at the East Courtyard got blown down by the wind last night, which is why he's training here today. I smiled faintly, saying nothing, nor did I go outside to look. Before Pei Du's death, he had often urged me to come with him to the Pei residence. He spoke of his home. Yes, he referred to the Pei estate as home, whereas I had always considered the place I lived for 17 years as nothing more than a prison. His home had an apricot tree that had grown for many years. It was beautiful, fragrant, and had been planted by his father, with him and his brother helping. In his home, there was a training ground and targets where his brother practiced martial arts, a screen woven by his mother, and paintings and swords left behind by his father. There, no one would bully me, poison my food, force me to clean the stables, or cut my clothes to shreds. I longed for it. Everything he described had already formed a vivid picture in my mind countless times. Now, all of that was right in front of me, yet I dared not go and see. I sat inside, quietly embroidering, and soon, the noise outside faded. I thought he had already left. Unexpectedly, when I lifted my eyes again, Pei stood right in front of me.
10.
This was only the second time he had come to my courtyard since we were married. Dressed in a narrow-sleeved tunic, his forehead still damp with sweat, he looked down at me from above. "Do you have tea?" I was startled for a moment, then quickly stood up to pour him some tea. In my haste, I accidentally knocked over the cup right after I filled it. Scalding water splashed onto my hand, and I gasped in pain. His expression darkened slightly as he instinctively took my hand, examining it for a moment before releasing it. "As the mistress of the Pei family, you should be more composed. Since marrying him, everyone had mocked me for not being worthy. Only he had repeatedly reminded me of my current status. He told me to be composed, told me not to endure everything in silence. But, clearly, I couldn't quite understand him. He didn't notice my expression and, after a moment, awkwardly asked, 'Is your back any better?' Once again, Pei surprised me. For some reason, I got the feeling that he had come here on purpose today. Perhaps just to ask about my injury. As for the reason, I had already figured it out. The eldest son of the Pei family, a left guard general known for his courage, had unintentionally hurt a woman. Feeling guilty, he couldn't sleep through the night. So, the next morning, he couldn't help but come by. It had nothing to do with whatever relationship we had. It was simply because I was a woman, a powerless woman. With that thought, I quickly composed myself and poured him another cup of tea. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table, took a sip, and then pulled out a bottle of healing ointment from his sleeve. "Take this." I accepted it, but before I could say anything, he stood and left. I lowered my gaze to the cup of tea. He had only taken the tiniest sip. It was clear he hadn't come, because he was thirsty. After that day, I didn't see Pei again. He seemed to be very busy. Too busy to spend time at the estate or to bother with me. He never returned to that training ground, until the princess of Wuyang returned to the capital. 11. I heard that the first thing she did upon her return was to find Pei and cry her heart out. I couldn't imagine what Pei expression would have been like. He was known as the cold-faced general. Would he be at a loss if a woman cried in front of him? Especially if that woman was Wuyang, someone with whom he had a long history. In my heart, I had long understood that Pei didn't marry me out of hatred. It was because of the letter Pei Du left behind. That letter convinced him to marry me. Only by marrying me could he keep me in the Pei family and protect me. Otherwise, if I were taken back to the Su family, everything that happened before would happen again. Now, with the princess of Wuyang back, Pei Yoji had protected me for long enough. I should be content. I couldn't possibly shamelessly cling to this kindness just because Pei Yoji was a good man.
12.
The day the princess of Wuyang came to the Pei estate, I was reviewing the household accounts. She entered with a group of attendants, leisurely walked up to me, picked up the ledger I was holding, and asked lightly, "Can you even understand this?" If it had been anyone else, I might have retorted, relying on Pei Yoji's support to assert the dignity of a general's wife, as he had advised. But now, standing before me was Wuyang, the woman Pei Yoji had feelings for. So, I smiled kindly and responded to her words, "I'm still learning." But in truth, I had a natural talent for such things and had already memorized everything in the ledger by heart. She snorted dismissively. After scanning the room, her lips curved slightly, as if something had amused her. "Married for 2 months, and Pei Ji still hasn't touched you, has he?" There wasn't a single trace of Pei Yoji's presence in this room. I didn't answer. She clicked her tongue. For someone as strong and vigorous as Pei Ji to have taken a new bride and yet still refuse to touch you, it's clear he must really dislike you. But I heard that Pei Du was very fond of you. He was weak since childhood, but even his taste was poor. It seemed that the more she spoke, the angrier she became. But my expression had already turned cold. She could insult me, but not Pei Du. I stood up and met her gaze, then slapped her across the face, my voice trembling slightly. Was his frailty his fault? How dare you speak of him with such disdain? The princess of Wuyang covered her face, ready to strike back, but suddenly seemed to remember she was in the Pei estate. Realizing her earlier mistake, she looked a bit guilty. This princess didn't mean it that way. As she spoke, her voice faltered. Then she suddenly looked over my shoulder, her face lighting up with joy. "Pei Ji." Pei Yuji glanced at the handprint on Wuyang's face, his brow furrowing slightly. I suddenly recalled the slap he had given me not long ago. At that moment, Pei Yoji turned to me and asked, "What happened?" Before I could reply, Wuyang smiled and said, "It was just a misunderstanding." She didn't mean it. "Pei Ji, we haven't seen each other in so long. Why don't you show me around?" Pei Yoji looked at her face again, and after a long pause, he finally nodded. "All right." Without sparing me another glance, he walked off with her. I watched their retreating figures, my hand trembling slightly. 13. I sat in my room for a long time, waiting until sunset, without getting up. I was waiting for Pei Yoji. I thought he would come looking for me after seeing me hit the princess of Wuyang. He would certainly tell me to leave. I had even packed my belongings, ready to depart the capital at night as soon as he mentioned it. After our wedding, Luo Jusi had been driven out of the capital by Pei Yoji's design. If Luo Jusi hadn't sent someone to guard me before he left, everything would be fine. If he did send someone, then it was simply my fate. I just felt sorry for Pei Du, who had sacrificed so much to protect me. Lost in my thoughts, I eventually fell asleep. When I awoke, Pei Yoji stood before me. For some reason, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. He stood with his hands behind his back, his voice low. "I have been in the capital for 3 months and must return. As for you..." Indeed, the situation in the north was still precarious. If not for Pei Du's death and our wedding, he wouldn't have stayed in the capital for this long. I understood, nodding in anticipation of his next words. He was leaving. So now he was going to expel me from the estate? But I hadn't even said a proper goodbye to Pei Du yet. I should have been more restrained today and not struck the princess of Wuyang. Otherwise, perhaps he wouldn't be so eager to send me away. However, the next moment I heard him say, "Pack your bags. You will come with me tomorrow." I was stunned. Huh. His expression was cool and composed, but seeing my reaction, his brow furrowed slightly. "The north is cold and harsh. Do you wish to go?" My heart tightened. 3 months ago, someone had asked me a similar question. A young man, pale and gentle, had said softly, "Once you leave, the mountains are high and the waters are deep, the future uncertain. Do you wish to go?" I nodded hurriedly, tears slipping down my cheeks. I was willing. I truly was. 14. My marriage to Pei Yoji was a royal decree, entirely proper. Following my husband to war would only be seen as a beautiful tale. I didn't take a carriage but wore men's clothing, riding alongside Pei Yoji. He seemed surprised to see that I could ride. After hesitating a moment, I told him, Peidu taught me during the journey, he took me away. At this, Pei Yoji paused, clearly caught off guard. He tightened his grip on the reins and asked, he can ride. In Pei Yoji's mind, Peidu was always the frail one, someone who would rather read books and brew tea by the fire than ride or shoot arrows. I smiled. Yes. He could do much more than that. He could write insightful strategies and read complex military texts. As I spoke, I raised my whip and looked at Pei Yoji. He was a man of depth, just trapped in his circumstances. I had known Pei Du for 3 years. Like the princess of Wuyang, many had mocked his frailty to his face. With Pei Yoji absent, everyone treated his younger brother like a child, bullying him for his youth. 15. Finally, I arrived in the north. As Pei Du had described, it had a completely different landscape from the capital. Indeed, it deserved the title of harsh and cold. Pei Yoji was busy with military affairs, hardly able to attend to me. I stayed in the camp. Later, as the number of wounded soldiers increased, I began assisting the military doctor. At first, the soldiers were unwilling. Only after Pei Yoji nodded did they allow me to dress their wounds. Once, Pei Yoji happened to witness this. He watched for a long time before asking, "Your technique is quite skilled." I nodded. I often got hurt when I was a child. He paused, remembering something, and didn't ask further. But as time passed, when he saw me again, he was no longer as aloof as at first. By the 3rd month of my stay in the north, the enemy attacked fiercely, even creating a new formation that was quite impressive. Pei Yoji spent all day in the tent, neglecting even his own injuries during emergencies. One day, while discussing strategies with the soldiers, he nearly fainted from exhaustion. A gasp of alarm echoed in the tent. I happened to be passing by outside, and in a moment of panic, I rushed in. Once the military doctor brought the medicine, I felt relieved. As I prepared to leave, I noticed a formation diagram not far away. My steps faltered, and I frowned. I've seen a similar diagram before. Pei Yoji looked up, his gaze fixed on me. Where? I replied. Pei Du is fond of the art of formations. He specialized in these things. I've seen his handwritten notes, which contained many strategies for breaking formations. This formation, while somewhat different from what I've seen, has similarities. If we apply this method, we might be able to break it.
16.
When I said the first part, the people in the tent clearly showed excitement. But once Pei Du's name was mentioned, their enthusiasm wavered. No one could believe that a weak-bodied young man, who had spent most of his life in the capital, would know such things. Pei Yoji's expression darkened as he stared at the formation diagram, remaining silent for a long time. I understood their concerns. Breaking the formation could mean life or death for tens of thousands of soldiers. It was indeed something to be cautious about. After thinking it over, I said, I've memorized the notes. I can draw them out for you one by one. Among them should be formations you have seen and know how to break. If I draw them correctly, you might give it a try. Upon hearing this, some tried to dissuade me further. But Pei Yoji looked at me with burning eyes. According to what you said, if it's all correct, I'm willing to try. Knowing time was of the essence, I dared not delay. As soon as I got paper and ink, I began to draw. After an hour, I finally put down my brush. Pei Yoji took the drawings from my hand and cast me a dark glance. You should go back and rest. All right. After that, the matter was beyond my control. 17. From that day onward, I continued to care for the wounded soldiers as usual. 3 days later, cheers suddenly erupted outside the tent. I stepped out to see a familiar general. He held a significant position in the army and had never thought highly of me, a mere woman. That day in the tent, he had been one of the loudest voices against me. But now he smiled and said to me, "Thanks to your drawings, we broke the enemy formation. This time, our army achieved a great victory." Tears glistened in his eyes, and blood stained his face, revealing how hard-fought this battle had been. He raised his voice. "I'm going to write a memorial and commend Pei Erlang." Suddenly, a wave of bittersweet emotions surged in my heart. I nodded repeatedly. "All right. Look, Pei Du of the Pei family, noble in character, unmatched in talent." 18. Pei Yoji was injured. The wound was on his chest, not life-threatening, but it kept him bedridden for several days. After his injury, I hadn't taken care of him, nor had I entered his tent much. But later, the military doctors were too busy and asked me to go once. From that time on, for some reason, I became the one to tend to his wound regularly. Every day, I would apply medicine and bandage him. Inevitably, there was some physical contact. I didn't think much of it, but his gaze became deeper with each encounter. The day he recovered, I handed him the medicine and was about to leave, but unexpectedly, he grabbed my wrist from behind. I let out a startled cry, falling into his arms. Pei Yoji was only wearing light clothing, and the heat from his body passed through the fabric and onto my hand. Flustered, I looked up, wanting to stand up straight. But he pursed his lips and said, "The Emperor has decreed to grant me the title of Marquis. We are returning to the capital." I was just about to discuss something with him. Perhaps we should divorce, and I wouldn't return to the capital with him. Just then, a soft laugh came from outside. "The Marquis and his wife are truly affectionate. It's enough to make me envious." My body stiffened. Pei Yoji, clearly displeased, withdrew his gaze and released my hand. "So, it's the chief eunuch." It was Luo Jiusi. With him here, I had no chance to escape. 19. Luo Jiusi was highly favored by the emperor, and after accomplishing his last task, the emperor was extremely pleased. This time, Luo Jiusi himself requested to travel to Mo Bay to deliver the emperor's decree of rewards. Naturally, the emperor readily agreed. After Luo Jiusi arrived, I rarely left my tent. Perhaps seeing his charming, seductive face again reminded me of the helplessness I felt under him that day. Between me and Luo Jiusi, there was a deep, fated entanglement. Now, although he had lost his manhood, he was thriving at the emperor's side, with half the court vying to win his favor. But 5 years ago, he was just a beggar lurking in a ruined temple, without even a surname. People only called him Little Jiu. That year, my mother passed away, and I was only 12. After her 7-day memorial, I prepared to leave the Su household. I carried a bundle, stumbling my way out of the city gates. In that ruined temple, I met Luo Jiusi. Back then, he was just a young boy living off begging, coaxing me, saying he would take me away, and telling me to call him Brother Jiu. I believed him and stayed with him for several days. But later, he betrayed me, selling my whereabouts to my father for 50 taels of silver. It was the first time I had trusted someone so deeply. Yet he told me, "I need silver, so I can only betray you." After returning to the Su household, I was beaten with 20 strokes and was no longer allowed to leave the courtyard. Had I not been lucky, I would have died then. The next time I saw Luo Jiusi, he had become a powerful eunuch in the emperor's inner circle. Casually, he called my name, asking me to accompany him on an outing. Then, right in front of me, he slowly killed a few disobedient people and turned to smile, asking, "After all these years, did you miss me?" I bit my lip, unwilling to say a single kind word. He merely smiled, and after that, took me out a few more times. It wasn't to show me the sights, it was to make me watch him kill, or force me to kill innocent people, peasants who knew nothing. I've killed many people over the years. The feeling of blood on your hands is quite satisfying. Here, try it. Be like me. I was too terrified to speak. For half a month, I was plagued by nightmares. At that time, Peidu's health had worsened, and he hadn't scaled the walls to visit me in a long while. Not long after, Luo Jiusi grew unsatisfied with just a few hours of daily meetings. He sent word to my father, having me delivered to his residence outside the city. Under the dim night sky, he staggered in, drunk, gripping my chin tightly, saying, "Brother Jiu has brought you out." Are you happy? His grip hurt. Being near you disgusts me. The man in front of me, who colluded with villains and oppressed the weak, had never done a good deed in his life. He turned red-eyed, caressing my hand. No matter. In time you'll see. I'm the one who treats you best in this world. As he spoke, he started undoing my clothes without giving me a chance to resist. I trembled in his embrace, terrified. I had heard that eunuchs like him, without manhood, had particularly horrifying preferences in bed. But fortunately, Peidu arrived in time. He saved me, but it didn't end well for him.
20.
The next time I saw Pei Yoji was the day before we set off to return to the capital. I had just received the news and was packing my things in the tent. Suddenly, the candle blew out, plunging the surroundings into complete darkness. Someone covered my mouth. His hand was firm. Don't move. I have something to say to you. It was Luo Jiosi's voice. I calmed down. Speak. He let out a cold chuckle. You've climbed your way to someone powerful this time. These past days, not only did he have me sent out of the capital, but he also disrupted my entire network. Everything's in chaos. Tell me, who do you think he did all that for? I was startled. So Pei Yoji had done all of this during those months in the capital? Suppressing the turmoil in my heart, I asked, what exactly are you trying to say? He tightened his hold, pulling me closer to face him. Then, disregarding my struggles, he grabbed my right hand and forced it onto his lower body. Feeling the heat, I quickly pulled my hand back when he wasn't paying attention. He said, I've just handed you my biggest secret. I'll overlook everything that happened before. Come with me. Don't return to the capital. I have plenty of silver now, enough to ensure you live a good life. Still shaken from the earlier shock, I found his words absurd. Why would you think I'd leave with you? He had slaughtered the innocent, using every possible means for power. I couldn't trust someone like him. Seeing my reluctance, he continued, Don't tell me you've fallen for Pei Yuji? Do you want to be his marquis wife? Without thinking, I blurted out, No. As soon as I spoke, there was a faint sound from outside the tent. Luo Jiosi didn't notice, his face filled with satisfaction. In that case, you shouldn't go back with him. Have you forgotten how his brother died? Gritting my teeth, I was about to respond when suddenly a low, anger-tinged voice came from outside the tent. This is a matter between my wife and me. You needn't concern yourself, Chief Eunuch. 21. After Luo Juicy left, Pei Yoji entered my tent and personally lit each of the candles one by one. Under the flickering candlelight, his gaze became even deeper and the expression on his face grew more unreadable. I wasn't sure how much he had overheard. Just as I was about to confess everything, he stared at the hand I had instinctively hidden behind me, his gaze piercing. What did your hand touch? There was no denying Pei Dalin's keen insight, a man who earned his title as Marquis at a young age. He could see through anything. My breath caught for a moment. Then, as if realizing something, he raised his voice and called out, Bring water inside. For the next half hour, he knelt in front of me, carefully pouring water over my hand, washing it clean bit by bit. After he finished, he smiled faintly, placing a hand on my shoulder. His towering figure loomed over me as he spoke. Did he tell you he's not truly a eunuch? I widened my eyes in shock. He heard, Pei Yoji let out a mocking laugh. If you want to keep something secret, best not do it at all. I'd already suspected this for a while, which is why I let him have his fun for a few more days. Yesterday morning, I received proof, and I've already sent a letter to the emperor. No surprise, he just got the news, and that's why he wanted to take you away. I stayed silent for a moment. Luo Jusi, no matter how many years passed, he would always deceive me. After a pause, I asked, And him? Pei Yoji's gaze fixed on mine. He gave a light laugh. In my territory, there's no way he can escape. I let out a sigh of relief. 22. The next morning, I followed Pei Yoji as we left Mo Bay. After traveling for a day, the group stopped to rest. I squeezed the water pouch in my hand and handed it to Pei Yoji, my eyes bright.
Here.
He raised an eyebrow, slightly taken aback, then teased, Are you trying to curry favor with me? I didn't expect that in his eyes. Simply offering him water could be seen as currying favor. Just like I hadn't expected that after everything that had happened with Pei Yoji and I could sit together so calmly. Not only that, but he had stood up for me and done so much on my behalf. I lower my gaze. Let's part ways here. I've looked at the map. Heading west from here leads to my mother's hometown, while the capital is to the south. As for my maid, Ryua, she suffered a lot with me. I left all my dowry for her and returned her indenture contract, so she can live her own life. The smile on his face disappeared in an instant. After a long pause, he chuckled. You've thought of everything for everyone. But why? I was puzzled.
Why?
He never truly loved me, so separating should be the most natural thing. Isn't that what he wants? I thought for a moment, but before I could answer, he spoke again, his tone coaxing. Let's talk about it after we return to the capital. I've already reported everything you did in Mo Bay to the Emperor, and he's very pleased. He wants to reward you. If you don't come with me, how am I supposed to explain it? In just a few short words, somehow, coming from Pei Yoji's mouth, there was a subtle hint of vulnerability. Once everything is settled, wherever you want to go, I'll go with you. After saying that, Pei Yoji seemed eager to return to the capital and receive his title. He turned to his men and said, Continue the journey. Pei Yoji, as expected, was a man of swift decisions, one who never wavered. But how could he accompany me? He couldn't. 23. When we returned to the capital, I learned that the tides had turned. After the old emperor found out about Luo Jusi, he immediately fell ill, so furious that he cursed him as a scourge while lying in bed. His sixth son attended him diligently, and soon after, the prince issued an edict in the emperor's name. The order, capture Luo Jusi, dead or alive. Hearing the news, I turned to Pei Yoji. He's dead already? After all, Luo Jusi had some involvement in Pei Du's death. With him in Pei Yoji's hands, there was no way he would meet a good end. Pei Yoji snorted coldly. Not yet. He's committed far too many crimes, each one needing to be settled. Killing him too soon would be letting him off easy. If the emperor hadn't fallen ill, there might have been a chance for Luo Jusi to make a comeback. But now, anyone with eyes could see that the sixth prince was in control. As for pay dues and my rewards, after returning to the capital, everything was handled by the sixth prince. When he summoned me, he was reviewing memorials in the palace. When Pei Yoji and I entered, his face lit up with joy as he quickly came over, patting Pei Yoji on the shoulder. Finally, you've returned. It was clear the two shared a deep bond. In the next moment, the sixth prince's gaze fell on me, and he smiled. This must be my sister-in-law? I was about to correct him, but Pei Yoji interrupted. How are things on your end? The sixth prince nodded. All going smoothly. He hesitated for a moment before glancing at me awkwardly. However, with Luo Jusi's downfall, the Su family is deeply implicated. I'm a bit unsure how to handle it. Pei Yoji glanced at me as well, his gaze indulgent. What do you think? The Su family, the place I lived for more than 10 years. I had many siblings there, but despite our blood ties, we constantly schemed against and mistreated each other. My father was indifferent, and my stepmother was cruel. Before my mother passed, life was already hard. After her death, I suffered even more abuse. Only after I learned to fight back did things improve.
Then he met Paidu.
Just when I thought things were getting better, my father smiled and sent me away. I met Pei Yoji's gaze and slowly I said, good deeds will be rewarded. Evil deeds will be punished. He smiled, raising his hand as if to stroke my hair, but then paused, his smile fading, and withdrew his hand. 24. By the time we left the palace, it was already dark. I walked alongside Pei Yoji. He was really tall, and his rugged features looked even more handsome under the moonlight, giving a sense of solidity that made one feel secure. But I knew I would have to leave sooner or later. Today, mentioning the Su family suddenly brought back memories of the last several years. I seemed to have been burdened with many things. At first, it was fate, and later it became about human lives. And I was powerless against either, unable to repay them. I must not have been a good person in my past life. But maybe not, because I met the Pei brothers. In the depths of spring, under a bright moon, with thousands of lanterns lighting the night, none of us spoke. It was only when we were almost at the entrance of the mansion that Pei Yoji tugged at my sleeve. With his eyes downcast, as if pondering for a long time, he finally made up his mind. Regarding Pei-do, you too. Before he could finish, a commotion erupted not far away. I frowned and looked over. To my surprise, there was a group of familiar faces. Outside the crimson gates, my proud stepmother was rolling on the ground, wiping her tears and crying, "Oh no, that Supanji is a harbinger of death. We've treated her well, yet she let her husband's family treat her maternal family like this." My elder sister was trying to comfort her, occasionally chiming in. My half-brother was the most vocal in his curses, and even Pei Yoji frowned at the harsh words. I pressed my lips together and instinctively took a couple of steps forward. It was at that moment that my hand was grasped by the person beside me. He said, "I'm here. I'll stand up for you." I suddenly felt like crying. Pei-do had said something similar. It felt similar, yet different. At that moment, looking at these relatives in front of me, I should have been furious, but instead, I felt a lump in my throat. Their curses grew harsher, and soon a crowd gathered around us. Onlookers commented, "So, General Pei's wife is indeed an ungrateful wolf."
Exactly.
I heard she wanted to run away as a child and later eloped. She's wild beyond measure. Such words I had heard since I was young and had long ceased to be upset by them. But at that moment, someone held my hand, pushing through the crowd. Then he stood in front of me, throwing his weapon into the throng, and calmly declared, "I will stand here today. Everyone can take their time to talk, but if any of you offend me, I will kill you in my rage." He continued, "My wife is pure and virtuous. Who dares to insult her?" In the end, I was enveloped in an embrace. It felt as if he would shield me from all the storms of life.
25.
Pei Yoji's imposing presence was indeed overwhelming. Immediately, the Su family members dared not make a sound. Before long, the sixth prince arrived, taking everyone away. Before leaving, he looked at me and smiled mischievously. Pei Yoji is a bit fierce, but he's not bad once you get to know him. Sister-in-law, don't let that make you abandon him. My heart stirred slightly. Once the noise around us subsided, I remained in the man's embrace. Then I heard him laugh softly. "Will you?" I asked. "Huh." His gaze was rarely serious. I hadn't finished what I was saying earlier. "What do you feel for Pei-do?" I pressed my lips together and spoke honestly. A kindred spirit. It was unrelated to romance. I understood his ambitions. He understood the thorns I carried. Pei Yoji sighed. "Do you want to see the letter he left behind?" The letter? My voice tightened, and my hand grasping his shirt began to tremble. Can I?" His voice was a bit hoarse. "Of course." 26. Pei-do's letter lay beside my pillow. I had read it back and forth 1,000 times. I was almost able to recite it from memory. He wrote to Pei Yoji, "Brother, I hope this letter finds you well. 3 years have passed since we parted, and I've sent you many letters, but you were busy with military affairs and rarely replied. However, with this letter, I hope you will see it. You probably won't believe that I'm writing this letter in a desolate wilderness. There is a girl beside me, sincere and resilient, who I coaxed into leaving the city to search for you together. But I feel that I might not be able to hold on much longer. I'm sorry, brother. Please don't be sad about this. For me, perhaps this is a good thing. I have been burdened by this body for too long, and have long known this day would come. I accept it calmly. It is nothing to others. All my life, I have lived under your wing. You have taken care of everything for me, and now, I'm afraid I will need you to do one last good deed for me. If I truly cannot go to the northern desert, can you protect her? Keep her by your side, and care for her as you would me." He treated me so well. How could I, who was alive and well, bear this? 27. A couple of days later, Princess Wuyang came to see me. She must have said something to Pei Yuji, for when she stood before me, her eyes were red. She told me, "Go tell Brother Pei that you want to divorce him.
Go on.
He shouldn't have married you in the first place. Now that Uncle the Emperor is also ill, that marriage contract can be disregarded. I'll ask Sixth Brother to allow your divorce." I remained silent and finally asked her, "Really?" After Princess Wuyang left, I prepared to return to my room. As I turned around, I spotted a person standing under a tree not far away. He looked like he had hurried over. The look in his eyes made my heart race for no reason. He asked, "What? Are you preparing to do a good deed for someone else?" I was momentarily stunned. "Yes." He stepped closer, his brows firm. "Listen closely. You are my wife, bestowed upon me through formal matchmaking. I have never had any other feelings for Wuyang. No matter what others say, as long as you don't want to leave, no one can force you." My heart felt a bit sour. He continued, "Can't you see? I have feelings for you." His gaze was so intense. It felt as if he wanted to know my innermost thoughts. He stared at me without moving. I suddenly thought of Pei Du's letter. His gaze was gentle, always patiently looking at me and lowering my defenses. It was clearly I who had harmed him. Yet in the end, he still wanted to apologize to me. He hoped for my well-being. So I said calmly, "But the general is a person of great feelings and emotions, like the snow lotus in the sky. I do not dare to insult him." Pei Yoji's brows gradually relaxed. He had killed countless people, maintaining peace in his territory. Yet at this moment, with the person he cared for in front of him, he felt helpless for the first time. After a long pause, he asked, "How do you know that in my heart you are not like this?" I raised my gaze and met his dark eyes. In truth, someone is also his moon. Not insignificant, not humble, very bright, very dazzling.
28.
My name is Supanji, a fragrant welcome for esteemed guests, dyeing the branches of hope. My mother waited a lifetime for my father, only to die in a dark and damp corner, while that man never came to see her. As for me, I have 3 secrets that I have never told anyone. The first is that I saw Pei Yoji long ago. That year, I was forcibly taken back to Su Mansion, walking on the street when the top scholar was paraded through. He was embraced by the crowd, with countless people wanting to marry him. The 14-year-old champion, how glorious he was. At the height of his success, he dismounted and asked my father, "What are you doing with a little girl?" My father had intended to kill me directly, but upon returning to the mansion and recalling this sentence while standing in the hall, he inexplicably stopped. The second secret is that since I was 12, I have not trusted anyone. I have been two-faced, cunning, and would never easily befriend others. But that night, Pei Du leaned on my wall, looking gentle, with features similar to someone I knew. So I reached out and caught him.